Hello and welcome back, everyone. Happy Monday. Everybody knows that Victoria 3 is the pinnacle of gaming when it comes to a competitive multiplayer environment, which is why I'm very pleased to say today we are going to be doing a little bit of a twofer video. This video is two things. First of all, it's an announcement that we're bringing back competitive multiplayer 3v3v3 on Saturdays, 9:30 a.m. PST. Starting this Saturday, if we can get at least 12 people to sign up, that is going to be the 9 players and 3 alternates. If you want to sign up, it's going to be first come, first serve. Just comment, "I will take the ring to Mordor," in the Discord link down below in the multiplayer section, and you will be signed up. But secondly, we are going to be doing a power rankings list for what nations I think are kind of the strongest going into this, in the specific context of competitive multiplayer 3v3v3, where the scoring system is based on a GDP growth rate multiplied by nominal GDP growth. And so this is going to reward countries that both grow their nominal GDP but also grow their GDP from a very large perspective. It's still going to be mainly the biggest countries in the game, but there will also be kind of a little bit of a discussion about the ones that have really high growth potentials. In particular, countries that have formidable nations are going to look good for this rankings. After the rankings, we are also going to talk a little bit about things that have changed since we last did competitive 3v3v3, which was back in patch 1.3 for threes in all the right places, and we are going to be doing this at the end because I figure a lot of the people who are less interested in the 3v3v3 probably won't be as interested in this as in the rankings, but a lot has changed since then, and so we will discuss how the changes might affect 3v3, v3, of course, with another 3, because there's 3 threes, because there's 3, and also teams of 3. The main idea behind teams of 3, just to be clear, is that it creates, or 3 teams of 3 rather, we can't forget the threes, is that it creates a sort of tripedal balance in that the 2 weaker teams are incentivized to keep the strongest team in check, so to speak, or that is the idea behind it. That way no team gets out of control, and this serves to balance out the fact that Victoria 3 doesn't have balanced, nations. The starts are just categorically unbalanced. You couldn't do a 1v1 in Victoria 3 unless it was a 1v1 in terms of PvE, but we are talking about PvP because everyone knows the crown jewel of competitive multiplayer is, of course, strategic map games that are like Victoria 3. Alright, first up in 10th place, passing up the Ottomans, which were the previous 10th place holder, we have Belgium. The Ottomans, I think, even though Tanzimat is easier to complete, I still think that these negative modifiers are going to be kind of annoying at the very beginning, at the outset, and you're a little bit slow to kind of get off the ground running, and Belgium has extremely good laws at the very start of the game. National militia will allow you to coordinate with anyone who has really high population. You can give them states now, and so if you feed any sort of Chinese states, for example, to Belgium, they'll be able to full conscript out 100 stack armies, really, really big armies. And very significantly also for Belgium is they are one of the few nations, I think there's only 4, it might be 5, that start with the technology of general staff. So they will start with skirmish infantry at the very beginning of the game, which means that you cannot be abused at the very beginning of the game. In multiplayer, it is very important to have the latest military tech in terms of playing PvPs, although you can probably defend a little bit more aggressively. And so Belgium is really, really good on that front of being able to have way bigger army than they otherwise would look like, and also way stronger army. They also start off with a really small GDP, so growth potential is particularly high. Coming in to take a look, they have a formidable in United Netherlands, which if they subjugate the Netherlands, let's say you have a teammate humiliate the Netherlands when you're rivaling them, or sorry, you're playing Belgium, you have a teammate humiliate the Netherlands, you can immediately subjugate the Netherlands very, very early into the game, and then form United Netherlands after you reduce autonomy, which is going to be nice because you will have the Dutch East Indies subject, and so that will be something that you could do to try and grow your GDP relatively quickly, get a quick annexation off as a Belgium here. Also significant with Belgium, and I think this is going to be one that's a little bit more subtle, but will be also a reason when we talk about the UK eventually, is Belgium has a very, very high density of financial districts at game start. They have a large capitalist class. It is not owned by the ownership people, which means they will be faster off the ground getting the investment pool going, which is going to allow them to extract money from their economy for the purposes of adding construction, which you can think of as your GDP growth rate. to that end, they also start with per capita taxation, which will be a lot better early on than being on land-based taxation, but eventually it will be a little bit of an annoying one because it makes swapping to prop tax harder. But one of the problems with being able to build a ton of construction at the very outset of the game is you don't have enough income coming in. Having a large capitalist class helps this. Having a better taxation method also helps this. And Belgium starts out with both of these things kind of firmly in place. In addition to, there's a lot of things you could do to make the trade unions powerful. Probably at game start, they start with 2% clout, which is quite a lot. You know, if you build a little bit, you get very, very few peasants left, and then you do some abdication shenanigans, you can probably get them reasonably powerful to the point where you could pass proportional taxation relatively early, but they are going to have a kind of off-the-ground running start as it relates to the size of their economy, being able to inform construction. Per million GDP at game start, they are going to be able to afford more construction than a lot of other starts, which kind of is the name of the game as far as it relates to, you know, GDP growth. So this is kind of another one of the reasons why we have Belgium in 10th place now, despite it being small and looking not very strong. There's a lot of things that you could do with them. They're flexible and they will round out teams really well as well. If you happen to pick up someone like China at some point, Belgium I think would partner quite nicely with China, because you can feed them your states, and by feeding them your states, you can allow Belgium to have this massive conscript potential with skirmish infantry. To my knowledge, the only countries with skirmish are Prussia, Belgium, France, Great Britain, and the USA. So in 9th place, and still in 9th place from before, we have Spain. Now, Spain's a bit of an interesting one because you know, Belgium has skirmish infantry, they have better tech and this type of stuff. Spain in particular has a really, really strong company kind of early on at the beginning, where they have two really strong companies. Altos Hornos de Vizcaya is a strong company, but also very strong is Duro y Campania, which is going to allow them to have an enormous amount of construction for the iron mines and the coal mines. And also very significantly, you can accept investment now. So maybe there's a situation where, you know, if you're playing with a weaker country that can invest in Spain, maybe you have Spain as your, you know, third pick, and you actually juice them up a lot. So they have this really strong company. They also have reasonable looking laws, kind of at game start, and not the best laws, not the worst laws. They have some subjects, which is going to be nice for that extra diplomatic pact income, which doesn't show up at their start GDP in terms of informing like what their GDP start is, but represents a large share of an economy and an ability to grow, because this will allow them to afford an extra construction sector and a half without actually requiring them to have a bigger GDP. So this is going to be pretty nice. They also start off with a reasonably kind of small, or a reasonably sized army considering their 9th pick. Really, the 9th pick is kind of a lot weaker than the top 8 picks, and so you have a choice between a lot of kind of weaker countries, and it might even be the case that Spain is weaker than Belgium. I'm not really sure. You do have the formable, though, with Spain, in particular, of Iberia. And so this is one significant bonus to them. And so being able to subjugate Portugal, reduce autonomy on them once, and then annex them is also going to give them a large growth potential, giving them an extra 7 million pops or so, and several million GDP. And it's also going to be quick to incorporate this type of stuff. Depending on the length of the game period, this might be more or less useful. But I do think Spain is going to be a relatively solid pick. Them sharing a border with France is going to be significant in some cases, and they also share a border with the UK. The UK border and the France border are both kind of liabilities in some sense, but I do think Spain is going to be the 9th place pick. But maybe Belgium's just better. It's a little bit difficult to say. Belgium, one problem with Belgium is that you can be conquered in a single war very, very, very easily, because you only have 2 provinces, and this is going to be a little bit scary if this comes up. Next up, we have Austria in 8th place, which is a downgrade from its former 7th place. And I just wanted to say that the 4th through 8th places, just as in their entirety, I think are all pretty close. And so I think drafting Austria a lot earlier isn't necessarily a mistake. They have a pretty large army at game start and a relatively high GDP at game start. They are the number 4 great power if we sort by GDP, and we kind of exclude the high pop countries of Great Qing and the East India Company. They do have the 4th biggest GDP at game start. So they do have it's going to be worse for their growth rate, but it's also going to be nice for where you start out at the beginning, and you can afford to field an army for longer. If you get in a big tangle with someone at game start, you might just stay on defensive because you in particular do not start off with skirmish infantry. This is a bit of a disadvantage, but I think one of the real big benefits of Austria as far as picks go, remember this is a team game, is that Austria kind of plays gatekeeper in a couple of ways, in that if you have Austria, you can virtually guarantee Prussia being able to form North German Fed. And so this is going to be really useful because this is a play pattern that's really, really strong, and so it kind of secures what you're doing with Prussia. And also, if for whatever reason you do want to go for Italy, which is somewhat reasonable, because, you know, if you start with Sardinia, Piedmont, and 2 million GDP, and then you incorporate all of Italy, there's something to that. Also, if you wanted to play in a singular power block, where everyone's connected and all play in one market, for the purposes of your GDP, Austria being adjacent to Italy, very, very close to France, where you could just conquer through Switzerland in order to make that happen, and also adjacent to Russia and Prussia, they're very central, and the Ottomans, they're very centrally located, and so I think of it less as like a power pick, and more as like a flexibility pick, because they're just kind of be good at a lot of things. Decently sized military, not much navy, not much potential to build a lot of navy because you don't have a lot of coastal provinces or build a lot of convoys, but they're in the middle of all the things, which makes them in some sense good, but also vulnerable, because if you have a belligerent, you know, Prussia, Russia, and Ottomans and France, then defending an Austrian partner will be difficult, and so it'll be interesting to see how Austria gets picked, but I think it often will just round out teams that pick Prussia as its primary value, and probably tend to go late. Austria historically didn't perform it performed pretty middling before, and I expect to see it somewhat middling, but now the lack of a starting navy is a little bit of a detriment relative to before. Next up, in 7th place, down from 5th place, we have the EIC. Now, caveat is, EIC is easily the hardest country to play. I think they have a really high ceiling and also a really low floor simultaneously, but there's been a couple of changes that have made the EIC a little bit different. First of all is you cannot ask to become a protectorate if you are independent. And this is important because the UK would handle all of EIC's wars and be able to just give in to wars to their own teammates if drafted by a different team. We have a rule set where Great Britain at game start has to release the EIC if they're on different teams. What you used to be able to do is just ask to be a subject of someone else. You can't do this anymore, and this is really significant because not being able to do that means you will get the break apart event no matter what, which means you will get an enormous amount of turmoil, which, to be fair, you can kind of reset, or you'll get an enormous amount of radicals, which, to be fair, you can kind of reset from with the resign from office. So it's maybe not the end of the world, but this is a pulse event that will fire every 20 years and give you a ton of radicals until you research pan-nationalism or decide to form Bengal instead. Now, that's a lot of words, but it's one of kind of an indication of one of the nuances behind EIC. To me, this is the scariest pick if someone knows exactly what they're doing, but it's really hard country to play. What it has in kind of the benefits another thing in terms of what's changed is you have a relatively high GDP. You do not own a big share of that GDP. A big share of that GDP is owned by Great Britain, which is going to be bad for you as the EIC kind of in terms of evaluating, because you will start with a GDP that's inflated relative to how much ownership of that you have. Because ownership is abroad, it's not counted. Buildings that are owned by the UK are counted towards the EIC's ownership, and because we're scoring based on GDP growth, that means your growth will be a little bit sticky, and also passing laws will be difficult with the EIC. Their political situation is rough to get through. I'm pretty sure you want to go tenant farmers. If you go homesteading, you will be stuck in the hellscape that is the rural folk for forever. But moving on from that, their advantages of the EIC is, as we mentioned before when we were talking about Belgium, you can feed anyone who has skirmish infantry states. If they have skirmish infantry and national militia, they will be able to get enormous amount of army just off of you feeding them a state, because you have really high pop states, and the high population makes it so that you have a lot of room to grow. Additionally, if you join someone's market and you just turn off migration controls, you can feed countries that have a lot of migration attraction, a lot of pops, independent of their acceptance level. They will not get pops from mass migration, but you will get intermarket migration. And so Someone like the USA might make an interesting partner where you could just flood them with a bunch of pops so that they can really employ up a lot of people. And this is a little bit of an interesting idea. Also, interesting in terms of the EIC is they're relatively isolated, and since navies are going to be a lot more important to defend, and landings are not so easy anymore, you can shore up a little bit of a defense, and I think taking out the EIC is going to be really hard. You don't have a land border except with Great Qing, and one of you has to take Bhutan in order to actually make that be a land border because this is impassable terrain, or you could take Nepal as well, I believe. Bhutan definitely allows it, and so this is going to make things a little bit harder for other people to get in. Now, to be fair, what people can do is they can instead declare on something like Sindh, try and conquer the province, and then use that to develop a front with you, since you can declare multiple wars now, so you would have to be on the lookout for that and defend people who are potentially trying to use as a landing bridge to get in on you. But if you do that, EIC is going to be very, very difficult to mess with, and they are going to be able to eco up. We have seen their ecos do really well in the past. I think they will continue to do well. They do have a very difficult to play start, and so I think that what we'll end up seeing is if someone knows how to play the EIC, I think we'll see this drafted early. I think we'll see this drafted a lot in terms of just the second pick of whoever picks Great Britain first. As their first pick, will probably pick up the EIC second or third, and so we'll see a lot of that. And so depending on the comfort level, we might see some early picks, we might see some late picks, we might see EIC left on the table. But if EIC gets left on the table, the two teams will just need to actually just like find a way to release them from Great Britain. Otherwise, I think you just lose the British team, just like full stop, if they are able to not draft EIC and still able to keep them as a subject. It's just kind of insane. You also have huge growth potential from annexing your subjects throughout the game. This will allow you to grow your GDP for a really, really low infamy cost. This is a poor example because they do have to have they have to be in the low section of their Liberty Desire, which I don't think we have anyone at Game Start who's in the low section, so you'll probably end up giving them exemption from service in order to do this, in order to annex them on the cheap, but this is something you could do. But you can't do it that much, because in the 25% they say no, if this rolls, you're in really bad shape, because then all your other subjects will be mad at you. So maybe this isn't as big an advantage as it was, but in any case, we will see EIC move down from 5th place to 7th place. I also think that the peasant changes the overall nerf to subsistence farms is going to be a negative for them, even though it starts them off with a lower GDP for the purposes of GDP growth rate. I think that it also, the decreased economic activity is also just bad for you, and so it's going to make them a less effective pick but a better growth pick, and so still interesting, still a growth-oriented pick with the enormous population, and I think still is going to pair pretty well with New World countries and Great Britain and be a conditionally really good-looking pick. They also start off with, decent military and tech, unlike Great Qing, and it is otherwise kind of somewhat similar to Great Qing. Next up, we have Prussia, up from 8th place into 6th place, and this one's also just difficult to evaluate because most of the power comes from your ability to form the North German Federation and Germany kind of later, and the other teams can prevent you from doing this, or can take measures to prevent you from doing this. This is going to be a strong play pattern because you'll just annex everyone who's in here kind of for free-ish. You do start off with the big customs union. This is the Prussian market. This is kind of what you're going to get when you get the North German Fed, but this involves you fighting Austria at some point, or being on the same team as Austria, and so it will require a little bit of setting up, but it represents an enormous growth potential. They start off with 10 million GDP, which is relatively small. In fact, their army relative to the expensiveness of their army relative to the size of their GDP, they have the most expensive army, which is worth noting because a day one war, Prussia will struggle with in terms of money, but Prussia also has excellent resources all over the place. Particularly Silesia is an excellent state, although building everything in Silesia leaves you vulnerable to someone just taking Silesia later. It's still maybe worth doing, especially if you make some sort of diplo agreement with other players that I won't take this state if you don't take that state, this type of thing. And so maybe like Austria and Prussia be like, okay, I won't take Bohemia, I won't take Silesia, this type of stuff, or we just won't take states off each other. I'm not really sure. It depends what the players want to try and negotiate with each other. and if they break any agreement, that will be a score penalty. But the ability to form the North German Fed is going to be the primary benefit of Prussia. The secondary big thing is you start off in the highest tech bracket. You start off with railways, which is going to be nice, and you start off with the very, very important skirmish infantry, which is going to mean that you can pair really well with high population countries. You pair nicely with Austria. You have a lot of growth potential, and you actually have a pretty good military at game start. It's just you don't have the economy behind it to like really support it. But you do have kind of a lot of growth potential with your really strong states like Silesia. I think that you also start off with a reasonably high amount of capitalist ownership. We could just take a quick look at that here, where, you know, your capitalists relative to kind of your manor houses, I guess it's not that good. Over 50%, we had Belgium had over 50% the size financial districts as they had manor houses. We don't end up seeing it that much, but you will still have at least the starting of capitalist ownership in Prussia. So I do think they will be a little bit faster out the gate in terms of just constructing and ecoing up, even if they don't eventually form North German Fed. They also, is worth noting, will develop their power block pretty quickly. This is something that's really difficult to quantify how useful this is. We haven't really seen it in play yet, but they will develop principles considerably faster than most other starts because they start off with so many people inside their block. This is the primary thrust, and so they don't really have that good of principles at game start, but they will get them really, really, really quickly. So as I said, it's tough to evaluate this, but you could also just play with Prussia, right? Have this block as your starting kind of point, and then invite other people in. You know, so you can invite Russia into your block, have Russia dissolve their block. I don't think it's going to be that easy to invite someone that big into your block. It's probably not doable, but this is something that players might play towards. They might play towards, you know, forming Italy, getting Italy in their block. Maybe you pick up Sweden as your kind of pairing, where you can guarantee the Schleswig situation, or the Schleswig-Holstein situation, as far as forming the North German Fed. Maybe makes some convenience, and you form some sort of block. I think it would be vulnerable. Sweden is kind of a growth pick. Prussia's kind of a growth pick, but it's a growth pick that's going to be a little bit flexible. I think it's going to be a strong pickup. As far as picks go, even though we're having it, I think we said this was 6th place, I think that Prussia very significantly is fine to draft really early as well, where you're just going to say, I'm going to go for Germany, this type of thing. But if players start interfering with a player, in the past we've seen people really dogpile China, just anyone for picking China. If people start dogpiling people for picking Prussia, then Prussia suddenly looks a lot weaker. And we've seen Prussia historically be very successful, but it is going to be vulnerable because your ability to form the, Germany is not guaranteed by your own power, and so it's going to depend on your team as well as what the other teams are going to maybe want to do to you or feel about the Prussia pick / Germany forming. Next up from 6th place, to 5th place, we have the United States of America, which is a bit of an interesting one because historically the United States actually has the worst win rate. And they haven't been picked super late, so it's not like the United States is super weak. They've been picked between 4th and 5th pick, but just have been they've performed very, very poorly in the past, and I think that's going to change a lot, or is changing a lot. I think that one of the disadvantages of the United States is it is hard for them to help out European allies. And so if you're allied with France, Austria, Prussia, Russia, or to a lesser extent Great Britain, I think this hurts your allies because it makes them more vulnerable. In particular, I think the USA pairs badly with either Prussia or Austria. But the USA migration has changed since we last did things, and mass migrations are way more, and they accept European pops, and if everyone's cranking up taxes to max, which causes a lot more turmoil now, and everyone's going high turmoil, and they're causing a bunch of their pops to immigrate, the United States is going to be the best posed to be able to rake in all that migration. And they're going to be able to grow their economy through that, as well as having good resources. And strategically, the United States, you just have excellent resources. You have one of the best resources in the game. You have a ton of places with the hardwood throughput. You have a reasonably large capitalist class at game start, if I'm not mistaken. 84 financial districts. That's quite a bit more than we saw in Prussia. And you'd have, not so big an economy at game start, which means that you're going to be able to get a large growth rate, and you don't have a large pop, but that's not for long type of thing. So I think the USA is really going to be about growth. Now, strategically speaking, the fact that you're isolated is both a bonus and a con. It's going to be a con, and to be fair, you're not isolated from the UK. The UK has a front on you, so this is also significant to note. But other than the UK, you are going to be able to defend yourself really, really well from other people, and then it's going to be really expensive for you to try and lose convoys to be able to ship stuff out, to be able to fight in other areas. You're also skirmish at game start, which is really strong, and national militia, which means you are going to pair well with the high population countries. So USA, difficult to evaluate, but I think that USA Qing is probably going to be a bit of a vibe, especially if Qing just decides to, if they find a way to get Qing into USA's market, which I'm not sure if there's a way to do that right now. But if you could do that and just start sending the immigrants to them, this would be really good. But also just Qing feeding a couple of states at game start, especially if someone declares on Great Qing for states. I don't think you can't trade states while you're at war, so this wouldn't quite work. But if Qing just trades a couple states to the USA at game start, this could be a way to give the USA a really, really strong military at game start and allow them to kind of punch above their weight of what they'd otherwise normally be able to do. But if you develop a navy, also enforcing anything on the USA is incredibly hard unless you're the UK, because they can defend their coast really aggressively, they can re-land, and it takes forever for you to try and land. It's not a little bit of a quick thing, and especially if both players are microing armies and navies, I think the USA will be really easy to defend and will be mainly about the combination of eco and migration. You can also form whatever power block you want, and then look to go very quickly for, if you go for freedom of movement, to get the extra migration quota, you'll probably already be getting most of the mass migrations anyways, but getting the extra quota will allow you to siphon off from other people. And so you can benefit from fights going on in Europe, causing turmoil, causing radicalism, and as well as the higher taxes and lower grain prices, or higher grain prices. And so I think that the USA is going to get a lot of growth. In almost all of my playthroughs, USA has had the most GDP growth in the hands of the AI, and I'm guessing that you will be able to grow relatively well. You start with skirmish, pretty flexible, but we do have it in as the 5th pick with the understanding that I don't think you early draft USA, and I'm a bit hesitant about the USA because there's some things that don't seem hyper spectacular about it. In particular, one of the advantages of the USA before was that you could infamy reset with the USA really, really cheaply because you would only lose the Indian territory, and now infamy reset's not a strategy. This is also a disadvantage for France as well. And so I expect to see the USA perform a lot better than they did kind of last season, but still probably maybe going to see them in the draft range of like 4 to 8, where they kind of round out some strategies pretty well, but have some weaknesses in terms of their placement on the map. So next up, in 4th place, down from 3rd place, we have Russia, and Russia's just, it just feels solid with not necessarily really, really big things standing out, and is going to kind of be like a pick that seems semi-supportive like Austria, but is just like a lot better than Austria in my opinion, although Austria pick makes sense specifically with Prussia for the purposes of guaranteeing Germany, but Russia could help out with that. They just start off with a really strong military, and if I'm not mistaken, they have either the 2nd or 3rd strongest navy. Navy being a lot more important now. This is something to write home about. They have a lot of pop, they have a lot of growth potential, they have a lot of resources, they have a lot of resource modifiers. They do wood better than anyone else, and so you can dump wood into other people's markets after just getting a 20% logging industry throughput bonus, kind of focusing on wood. They are going to be a little bit difficult to play because of the internal politics, but you can use the abdication mechanics, these types of stuff, to try and abuse your way to something reasonable relatively quickly. It's just going to be very, very solid, and I think that Russia, even though there's like less distinguishing features about Russia than anything else, Russia has really, really nice frontage, or they have fronts with everyone, which can be a pro or a con, but they're one of the few powers that has a front with Great Qing, which I think is overall an advantage in terms of picks, whether or not Great Qing is on your team, because it will allow your team to fight Great Qing easier, and if Great Qing is on your team, it'll allow your team to defend Great Qing easier, although a lot of Qing's benefits are similar to Russia's benefits. I think that this is useful, and you also have a front with Prussia and Austria. So you have a front with everyone, and you can bury your capital deep enough into your lands that if you're on all defense, it's incredibly hard to just try and push the front to your capital. But it's this front here with you have Prussia, really far from like Perm, which I think you can move your capital to Perm, and it's probably a decent state to move your capital to, but very close to Berlin, very close to Vienna, very close to Beijing. And so the vulnerability seems a little bit asymmetric in regards to your fronts with Russia. And again, very, very solid in terms of the tech it's not like S tier, but you have a lot of pops, you have a lot of growth potential in that way. And I do think Russia's quite solid. Your IGs are like kind of bad, but like it's whatever. You can figure it out. It's going to be about modernizing it, Russia. And so if you know how to manipulate politics, this is kind of like one of the little stumbling blocks for Russia. I think it'll be just fine, and it'll just represent a really solid pick, especially if you don't know what you want your strategy to be. I think it pairs well with kind of a little bit of everything. So Russia's going to be quite solid. Alright, the ordering of the top 3 is a little controversial, so before we get into those, I thought I would just honorable mention, appearing on our top 20 list for the first time, are Bolivia and Argentina, which I think are going to be very nice for the same reason that Belgium, Two Sicilies, Sardinia, Piedmont, and Prussia are nice, in that you have a really large formable that you can make use of if you have a little bit of help from whatever your allies are. So maybe they're a reasonable kind of 9th pick because you can form Federation of the Andes. Now, to be fair, there's a bunch of construction malices all about here, so that's a bit of a vibe, but you do get gold in Bolivia, Peru-Bolivia, and Peru-Bolivia is probably the strongest start for forming, in particular, the Federation of the Andes. You just have to subjugate or do it diplomatically, because this is a major unification. This can be done diplomatically, although this might be a little bit difficult. I haven't tested on this at all. I don't know how easy or hard it is to do with Bolivia, so I'm a little bit in the dark, but this is something that's worth mentioning because you also start off with under 1 million GDP. So in terms of percentage growth, Bolivia will be just disgustingly good. In addition to having all the gold and stuff, if you are picking up all these countries kind of for freezies, good dealsies, 500,000, nothing, 1/3 of a million, a little over 1 million, 500,000-ish, 500,000-ish. If you're picking up all these for free, you're going to have an enormous growth potential just on your own, but you also have quite a bit of unused arable land in La Paz and some other places where you can get and play the migration game a little bit to some extent. Maybe you go with something with the USA and like Bolivia and China, for example, might make an interesting team where you can utilize the pops from Chinese provinces to populate your areas if they just feed you one state, and this allows you to get all the labor you need, something like this. To a lesser extent, you could also form Federation of the Andes as Argentina, and Argentina allows for the biggest possible Federation of the Andes. You do not start with it with game start, but after you form Rio de la Plata, then you can form Federation of the Andes, or I think there's some other condition that lets you form Federation of the Andes where you gain the culture that is needed for doing it. However, I haven't tested this that much. I don't know how consistent it is. I don't know how disruptible it is, but I do think it's worth mentioning. They start with an even smaller GDP, but it is going to be based on team GDP, not individual GDP, your growth rate. So the difference between, 800 whatever, or sorry, 900 whatever K versus 690K, nice, is going to be relatively negligible. I think you just go with Bolivia most of the time because I think it's going to be more consistent, but I'm really not sure between the two of these. But I think that this formable is going to be reasonable. It is going to be decent. I think we have these at like 14th and 15th place with a really heavy-handed asterisk that this might just be a really good formable idea. And also, I think that you are not that vulnerable. vulnerable. You have the same sort of safety as, you know, someone like the USA has. And so maybe if you have no continental European guys, like no Prussia, no Austria, no Russia on your team, and if you have someone like the UK, maybe the fact that you lean into the Navy for the purposes of defending, you know, your coast and this type of thing, and if you could control everything here, it's going to be really hard to push you or land you or these types of things, especially if you establish naval dominance. I think this one's worth thinking about, maybe one worth doing, and one we haven't seen before, even picked or even, like, discussed, because most of the games that we have played were before Federation of the Andes was a formable under Bolivia. And so I think this is one that'll be interesting, and hopefully we see it at least once, although I think it's probably weaker than Belgium. Alright, so the next three were incredibly difficult to rank. I actually switched the rankings up quite a bit, like halfway through making this video. I think any one of them could be drafted at first, any one of them can be drafted at third, and it makes sense. They all seem really strong, just in different ways. The least flexible of which is Great Qing, which is why we're going to put it in third place. Great Qing was really the boogeyman of last time we did 3v3v3s, just incredibly powerful in terms of nominal GDP growth potential, but kind of wasn't really that great at percentage GDP growth, so in that way it was a little bit rough, and it was often the boogeyman in the sense that people didn't want to draft it because it would get dogpiled at game start very often because people were afraid of the GDP growth potential, and Great Qing was incredibly vulnerable at game start, and so we actually saw Great Qing not get drafted a lot, which is a bit of an interesting play pattern. The really big thing is you have this enormous population with which to play catch up, and you don't start off on good PMs in any of your buildings, or really with that many buildings, so when you start switching the PMs to better PMs, you actually have a pretty big chunk of buildings. You have 50 glassworks, 50 furniture manufacturers, 16 textile mills, all on terrible PMs, and so when you switch up the PMs on all of these things, you get a large share of GDP growth, and so we saw Qing do pretty well when it was picked and didn't get dogpiled when we were on a nominal GDP growth scoring system, and I'm expecting Qing to not get dogpiled as much as well. We will see how that plays out, but I think that people might prioritize the UK. If EIC is left undrafted, the UK is going to be insane, and so I think that's a bigger priority. And if Prussia continues to perform really, really well, maybe people will dogpile the Prussia pick or be more concerned with preventing the formation of the North German Federation than they are in disrupting Qing. To the end of actually having a high percentage GDP growth, though, because of the way subsistence farms were nerfed, China went from having like 130 million starting GDP to 82 million starting GDP, so this much smaller starting GDP is okay. It's worse from the perspective of us wanting to have more minting to be able to afford construction and stuff, but it's better for the perspective of score, where we are going to have a smaller starting point, and it's not going to warp our entire team's starting GDP as much, up, because proportionally, a lot of other starts have gotten lower GDP, but no one has decreased their starting GDP by anywhere near as much as Qing, and so this, I think, from a scoring perspective, is also going to be a little bit better for Qing, and they just have like unlimited growth potential, especially if the game goes multiple sessions. There's ways to feed your provinces, which we've kind of discussed in other areas, but specifically countries like the USA and Belgium, which have skirmish infantry and national militia. You feed them a state, they will have 100 max conscript level, so you can just feed them like Fujian, and then they will be able to conscript up, 100 guys, and they can put down an edict to make the conscription come up faster. But I think the very, very significant thing that is going to make Qing a lot better, and something that makes them worse is they can't conscript up cannons at the start of the game, but the very significant thing is you can now park units in your allies' HQs, and so you can defend against naval landings. So if you have someone like Austria with Great Qing, Austria can just park 70 units inside Great Qing's, coast, and then suddenly Great Qing is really hard to land. So if you don't have a war where, either Russia or the EIC are on your side, it might be hard to get in on Great Qing. Also, the Navy is now meaningfully important for being able to prevent landings, and you can build up a huge fleet as Qing, and your boats are just as good as anyone else's, and before anyone gets ironclads, so you do not have this kind of weakness here, and so I think that this is also going to play quite strongly once you escape the opening salvo, if the enemies decide to dogpile you, which I'm not even convinced that they should, but The disadvantage here, though, or reason to dogpile you, is Qing provinces are worth a ton of GDP. Not anywhere near as much as they were before, because it's primarily coming from the subsistence farms, and those subsistence farms were nerfed, but taking them can be good for enhancing your own score. We'll see if people are willing to draft Qing. I have been bullish on Qing, whereas the rest of all the players have not been bullish on Qing at all, hence it going undrafted, and I've been putting it at #1 pick. I think that it's still really, really strong, and I think its biggest weakness is significantly improved, but the problem is that Qing isn't very flexible. I think that whoever you're paired with, you want to be paired with someone who has a strong land military, and so, or ideally, two people with a strong land military that can maybe leverage some of your advantage. So Russia, Qing, USA is maybe an interesting one where they can use the skirmish. Russia eliminates one of the fronts, and then, okay, good luck pushing through all this for forever through the combination of like Russia's troops, USA's troops, and USA is going to be able to easy defend coast. They are going to be able to, conscript up out of Qing provinces that have been gifted over to the USA, and so I do think there's a lot of flexibility here and ways you could go about things. You're going to have to eat the Opium Wars debuff pretty early on. I assume you just tell Great Britain to shove it, and then they do what they want with you. Maybe you can make a deal with Great Britain. Specifically, Great Qing with the UK, if this was ever drafted, would probably be really, really strong. This is, to me, is like the spookiest outcome. If you get something like Great Britain, Great Qing, how are you supposed to get in on Great Qing when the UK could defend their coast and they could just park all their army over here? They could defend their coast with boats, and then now you can't push them, or you can't use, or maybe the other way around's better. Except Russia can push in through the land, but overall, just really, really strong growth pick from having so many pops that you can, grow and eventually get working in this type of thing. They will be behind on tech as well, but you can just park down a whole bunch of universities and eventually play catch up. And so, leaning on your allies for both, the technologies as well as the military, while you try and do the eco stuff, I think will be quite strong because, again, you're pretty far behind. You're nowhere near general staff. This would be quite a long time before you get it, and so this is the weakness. It's the least flexible, but from a raw power level, this is nothing. This is nothing to sneeze at. All right, next up we have Great Britain in second place, moved up from fourth place, and Great Britain has benefited a ton from the changes of 1.7. In particular, I think they have benefited the absolute most in terms of their placement. Just kind of talking through it, you can now defend against landings with boats, which wasn't the case when we were last running this, and you have the biggest navy at game start by just about double, so no one's going to be able to really oppose you. This also allows you to help out your allies a ton. In the late game, people will be able to build up their navies, sure, before we get to the late game, but in the late game, specifically raiding convoys in order to depress other people's GDPs is good late game salvo for maximizing score, so this is something to consider, before we run out of time, and it's going to be, they're going to be a lot more powerful because previously you used to just be able to multi-land in England and just automatically get in, and Great Britain was a huge liability because they could be enforced on really easy. Now they're probably the hardest to be enforced on. In addition to that, they start out with the most financial districts in the game, so their capitalist class does start out very, very strong, and even if the EIC is not with them, they will still be getting 7k from Diplopacts or roundabouts, which helps for cranking up construction quite a lot, and their ownership that's overseas in the EIC doesn't count towards their GDP, and so to the extent that that's useful, they start off with a relatively low GDP. Their GDP is just 2.5 times the size of Prussia, a little bit less, and so their growth potential and the ability to rack up a really high score by having a really high both nominal and percentage GDP, I think this potential is really high with Great Britain. They're very flexible. They start off with skirmish infantry. They're one of the 4 countries that starts off with skirmish infantry in the best tech bracket, and also very importantly, and this is kind of tied to the EIC to some degree, is you start off with a power block. And colonial offices is maybe not that useful in multiplayer, but you start off with the fastest mandate generation in terms of power block, and you start off with a power block that's going to include your first and second pick. If you do pick up the EIC, and your third pick might be able to get in very easily, and so you will be able to have a power block where you can leverage it really, really well. And you will also have this enormous amount of authority, so you can put construction edicts down in like all your states, or whatever edicts you want in all your states. You know, the education edict to try and be the first one to trench. And this is kind of hard to evaluate exactly how good this is, but you will be able to mandate up faster than everyone else. And also, since you're ranked 1, and I believe you need to be rank 1 in order to unlock this principal slot, you will also be locking the other countries out of having 4 principal slots, or you will have 4 principal slots where they might not be able to. Now, to be fair, a lot of our games have only gone 1 session, which is not enough to fully fill everything out anyways, so maybe this is a little bit less of a vibe. But I do think Great Britain is really, really, really strong, and I think when you're kind of picking Great Britain, maybe one of the questions you're asking yourself is, do we have a team member who's comfortable playing the EIC, because the EIC is really hard to play? And if the answer is yes, Great Britain looks a lot more attractive. If the answer is no, it's maybe a little bit rougher, but you could also just pick them and hope no one picks up EIC. I think this is going to be a really wild card situation with the draft, and you know, leaving EIC open. If EIC is ever not left open and the teams just let you just have EIC, I think that's really bad for them. Although, to be fair, your foreign investment will also go into the EIC, and so this is maybe a little bit of a thing, but yeah, so many of the buildings are owned in the home counties, and so not 100% sure if having subjects is good, because your construction queue can build in your subjects, but then your subjects pay out more to you in Diplopacts, that I think overall it's kind of maybe a wash, even if it's slightly bad, you know, on a per construction basis. But Great Britain, very strong, very resilient, very flexible, just kind of ticks all the boxes. Now that I think that if you need to enforce on Great Britain in order to, if you need to land the Isles in order to win the game or prevent Great Britain from winning the session, you just can't. If the Great Britain player is highly competent and organizes their armies in such a way that there's a lot of backup armies that are on don't allow borrowing, like really small 10 stacks, I think this is the way the meta is going to work. That way they can't all be occupied in one army and also have a navy patrolling around. It's just going to be, there's just going to be no way. And you can stop much, much larger armies with just like a single like 200 stack navy or something, with one commander that's just good for blitzing everyone down. And then also if someone has a really strong economic kind of situation, but they are highly reliant on their convoys or trade, then you can raid their convoys down and this will wreck them, which was one of the reasons why we were saying Russia with EIC, having the contiguousness was maybe going to be something that's really useful. If you had something like Russia, EIC, Austria, then you're less vulnerable to convoy raiding because you have land access to the people who you'd maybe try and get a block with. But really difficult to evaluate how useful this block is. Them being ahead on the industrialization game and having ownership overseas, though, this is going to be strong, and it's underrepresented in their starting GDP. So I think Great Britain's gone from being kind of a middling trappy pick to a pick people will fight over, which is fitting because, you know, the game's Victoria 3. Finally, in first place, we have France. Now, when we initially did this list, I actually had them at third place. But France, last season, was just the absolute boogeyman because they just had a ton of advantages. The most important being the strongest standing army, which, while I think this is less important now, is still definitely a factor. They have the strongest standing army, and so they will be able to flexibly support anyone else. But in addition to that, it's not like they just have a standing army. They're just also really good at everything. They also have the second biggest navy at game start with 100 total ships, which is really significant because I think Navy is a lot more important. And so this is something that Austria and Prussia, for example, are really bad at. Russia has a decently sized Navy relative to other stuff they got going on. You also have a pretty large population for a European country, but are still just a little bit less, or just have a little bit more GDP than the UK, which is kind of a testament to the UK just having and starting with an enormous amount of buildings and being able to leverage that into a big capitalist class. They had over 250 financial districts. France only has 117, so that is a little bit of a vibe, just a little bit. But you are in really good shape just as far as kind of your overall stat line, and you also have the tied for the best tech having skirmish infantry. So this is all really, really strong and just really flexible, meshes with everything. And on top of that, okay, so what you don't have relative to the UK is you don't have a power block you already started with, and if you were to form a power block, the power block would not be able to generate mandate very quickly. So this is kind of a little bit of a ding, but I think despite that, you could probably make use of good use of France, and France is going to pair well with everything. A big reason why we moved France from third to first, though, was we were looking back over their bonuses, and they have recently changed how this works in terms of building in other people's countries, but France gets this obscene construction efficiency bonus, and I thought they nerfed it to 5%, but it's still 10%, so if they're powerful, the industrialists are powerful, and they're really happy, which is really easy to do, we just go, whoop, we're passing laissez-faire now. If you have this sort of situation going on, they will get happy, you will be able to make them powerful at some point, and you will be getting 10% state construction efficiency, up to 20% state construction efficiency, and this is just a disgusting economic modifier. Like, this is way better than getting extra investment pool. Not to mention the investment pool modifier is like less useful on the back of laissez-faire giving you a modifier, but this is just going to be insane. I'm not 100% sure how it works in terms of investment agreement, but if you have an investment agreement with someone else, like let's say we form an investment agreement with Spain, and Spain builds in France, my understanding of the bonuses, the construction bonuses, is that they would get to use our construction bonus with their construction as long as they're building in our nation. Now, the problem here is that they recently changed this, so now I'm not sure exactly how it interacts, where if you have a bankruptcy, the bankruptcy will not cripple your ability to build in another country, and so I'm not sure if it's now applying your construction or someone else's, but if it's applying your construction, you could still feed money into France. If France gets to use their construction modifier when building in a foreign place, everyone else could just bankroll France on the team, and France just builds in other people's nations and then takes on their debt. And in this way, you could leverage having the construction efficiency while also just selling the buildings back to the owners. So if we built in Russia, let's say, and then we just put all the Russia stuff up to be bought by the Russian investors, then the Russian investors would get a whole bunch of money, and then the Russian investors would build wherever, but the French, with France, we would just build in our allies' countries and just own the buildings ourselves or sell the buildings back to them, but in that way be able to leverage us having a disgusting amount of construction efficiency. Now, all that said, France is good at everything. Yay, we love France. The spooky thing about France is if you don't know how to avoid revving, France has really got a very strong vulnerability, because if you rev in 3v3v3, and people are playing aggressively, as they probably should be, and they side with the rev, or they side with both sides of the rev, you can get your entire run bricked. Now, I think the way we handled it before is 25% of your growth was just not counted, but if you have people siding on both sides of the rev, and then they only help the side that the player is not fighting on, then a rev can be just like a death sentence in terms of your team's score. And so this is something to keep in mind. And if you don't know how to avoid revving as France, because France does have, stuff that makes them rev easier, like plus 100% radicals, minus 50% loyalists, plus 25% political movement radicalism, more legitimacy penalty. Like, France has problems in this regard, and this is exacerbated by 1.7's just increased radicalism in general, and maybe high taxes are not viable as France, although I still think you probably swing it. I just haven't tested this. This is just something to keep in mind as a weakness of France with all their strengths combined, and maybe because of that they should have been ranked lower, but come on, this is a disgusting bonus, especially if you get the capitalists bolstered enough to be strong. So we're gonna have France at first place. Okay, so just to recap, we do have a spreadsheet out to the first 20 places, although we're not really as sure about, kind of the bottom scrum, where they belong. In particular, I think being unrecognized is a lot worse now, but okay, we're just gonna kind of swing through this real quick. Is we have France in first place, and we do have this notion of a draft range where even if someone's not as high on the rankings, they can be reasonable to draft in a different spot, in my opinion. So this is why we have draft range. This is why we have Qing with this interesting looking draft range where, I think Qing is less flexible, perhaps more vulnerable, maybe a bit difficult to play. And so drafting something like Russia early on would not be insane. And so just quickly, we have the United Kingdom in second, then Great Qing, then Russia. Russia having a lot of flexibility, being a good supporting role in addition to Austria. France is also a great supporting role and can go with everything. We have the USA, which is going to be really strong with the migration. This might be a little bit of a sleeper, still not sure. I don't think it's that good getting picked, good enough to get picked third, but maybe I'm wrong. Prussia, this could maybe go in kind of the second to eighth slot, where you are looking to form Germany and looking to gain GDP that way, and you'll be quite strong. You have access to skirmish infantry. Then we have the East India Company. It's seventh, but can go as early as fourth, especially if you get someone drafting, the United Kingdom in their third pick. Maybe they just want to lock in EIC, especially. I would not be shocked to see this. And then we have Austria, again, kind of a supportive pick that makes stuff more flexible. And I think if someone early drafts either Austria or Prussia, it kind of opens up the other one or keeps the other one a little bit more open, or makes the draft pick a little bit less kind of attractive. And then we have Spain and Belgium, which I don't think are ever worth picking before ninth pick. And I don't think any of these countries are even conceivable picking before ninth pick. And so it's really like the top 8, but to some extent kind of the top 3, then, the top 8, and then everyone else in terms of power level. And so whoever gets the first pick and is going to be forced or saddled with the last pick probably does have to give something up. In the past, I think that France was so good that it was really, really worth it to have the first pick, and you even see the win percentage that we've had in the past, and this has made sense. I don't think this is the case any longer. I think the UK and Great Qing are a lot closer. Well, Great Qing's like this weird aberration because it's I really don't know how Great Qing is going to play now because of the situation where you can actually defend Great Qing if you have a good land army. So don't know what to make of it, but we do see of the 7 sessions we've had, they were only picked 4 times. And I don't think this includes the additional session where the finals, where it was 2 sessions long. So this is kind of our rankings. Not hyper confident in them. It remains to be seen on a lot of these. A lot of these are big question marks. Like, I don't know if the USA is insane or not. I don't know if the EIC, if someone's really good at playing the EIC, is just considerably better. And I don't know how good Great Qing is at this point. These are kind of the really big wild cards in my mind. And it'll be exciting to see what people can do with them. Just a kind of a reminder, we are going to be playing from 9:30 a.m. PST. Check-in will be at 9:15 for players. If players miss the check-in, then we will go to the alternates. If you want to sign up below by commenting, I will take or sign up on the Discord in the multiplayer section by commenting, I will take the ring to Mordor. It will be first come, first serve for the first 12 players, where we will get 9 players and 3 alternates. We will not fire unless we have at least 12, because I don't want to feel like I have to track down players or find players last minute. I don't want to do that, and so if we're not going to have enough, then we're not going to have enough. Now, let's talk a little bit about what's changed in terms of the strategy. Alright, so the first thing is combination of peasants and migration. So migration is way more powerful, and the fact that you have available labor is actually a lot less important than it used to be. And so maybe picks like Great Qing and EIC aren't as good as they were before, because as long as you can manage to find workers to employ, it's less important, and so countries, like the USA suddenly look way more attractive, and it remains to be seen what it looks like when there's just 9 players piloting some of these things and also fighting over this stuff. So the USA, though, if the USA gets into a power block with freedom of movement and everyone in Europe is fighting, mommy and daddy are fighting in Europe, that's going to cause a lot of turmoil. That's going to make people upset if everyone's cranking taxes, and so you can get a lot more peasants. But also on the topic of peasants, they're worth a lot less when they are not employed than they used to be, because the weekly balance is significantly lower than it used to be in these buildings, because they produce way less goods because of the changes to subsistence output, and also just how effective the PMs are. And so this is a lot less valuable economically, but that it's less valuable economically seems to be baked into the reduced GDPs, because the countries that have reduced their GDP by the most are all the countries with an enormous amount of peasants. So maybe that's a bit of a wash, but maybe it just means you have the available labor without having to have the inflated GDP at game start. And if that's the case with Great Qing, and you can lock down your labor with closed borders, maybe this is actually just insanely good. So this is kind of a lot more difficult to make heads or tails of what's going to be good. Another thing that is going to be, I think, critical is going to be new ownership, which is that the people who start off with a lot of financial districts are going to be a lot more explosives, even if you can get on the same laws in terms of being able to build up a lot of construction. I think we talked about this a little bit before, but in particular in the early game, especially if you're on land-based taxation, which most people are, per capita is a little bit better in the early game, but in the midish game, it's worse because it's harder to switch to prop tax. But it's really hard to extract money out of your economy and use that money to build more construction. And so what I think what is really, really useful for extracting money out is the investment pool. So the investment pool is just way more useful early on. And so that it is harder to get stuff in the hands of capitalists, because the buildings you build are going to be owned by the state. That this is the case is a very significant kind of downside for the people who do not start as industrialized. It is also why Belgium pops off when the AI is playing Belgium, and it also one of the reasons that the UK will also consistently pop off, because Belgium has a disgusting amount of financial districts relative to its starting condition. I don't know exactly how important this is. My sample size playing different runs on this patch is really low, but I think we'll get to see, especially if someone picks Belgium and just pops off really hard. This will be a bit interesting, because Belgium's super vulnerable, especially against France. I think that you share a border with France and Prussia is significant, because either one could bully you, but if you had France on your team, you would be really safe, because no one can really deal with France if you have France defending you. So that's kind of another thing. Also, and we've discussed this all throughout, I think the Navy's just way more important than it used to be, because back when we played a lot, you used to be able to multi-land with one boat and a dream and get in. And so now this is not the case. You have to know how to fight with navies. You have to know that the navies that are fighting, you want to have exactly one commander, because then they will be leading all the troops. You can also block navies or block landings for a really long time just by doing this sort of cheese, by just, okay, we're going to make one army with one thing, and then we're just going to put in a bunch of commanders, and they will take forever to churn through this. Now, this is tedious. It costs a bunch of bureaucracy, but they will have to win 4 battles in order to prevent this, in order to be able to get in. I don't know to what extent the players are going to be able to micro this. This might be something we make rules about, but you can prevent people from getting in a lot more easily than you can force something in. And so maybe it could be the case that who you have borders with becomes way more important, both offensively and defensively. And so if you get a team where you have a lot of borders and also really strong military, this might be something you can leverage. So for example, France and Russia might be this disgusting pairing where you have borders with everybody, but in particular there are also going to be people who can dodge borders. The UK doesn't have to worry about borders to a lesser extent the USA, you do have that border with the UK, or the Hudson Bay Company, which the UK can call in order to gain access to a border, but also maybe this makes playing South America viable just because they will be able to play really defensive, hiding behind a navy, and not need to invest as much money in a land military. Another thing that's come up is multiple wars. So we actually saw one instance of a game session where someone held another country hostage by making it impossible for them to enforce the war and just sticking out the war forever so that they couldn't ever declare another war. Now, once the wars popped off, you can just declare as many wars as you want, which means this might be a situation where in order to micro, you actually end up fighting other people. Like, in order to get in on the USA, maybe you declare war on the Hudson Bay Company. Like, let's say if France wants to fight the USA, maybe they declare war on the Hudson Bay Company and then land the Hudson Bay Company just so that they can push into the USA. This is going to give a lot of interesting options. It will also allow you to feed stuff to your allies. So let's say France declares war to take Beijing against Great Qing. Great Qing has an ally in the USA, let's say. The USA can then declare war on Great Qing after that, and then to take Beijing themselves, and then Great Qing can just capitulate to the USA, invalidating France's war goal. The ability for you to invalidate war goals more easily by being able to declare multiple wars is maybe something that we are going to have a rules discussion about, but for now it'll be with the rules because we want to just have the most open rule set possible to just really see what the highest powered gameplay looks like. And of course it's going to look really cheesy, but if it ain't cheesy, it's got to be cheesy, otherwise it won't slide down easy. Some sort of rhyme. It ain't easy being cheesy. That's what we were thinking. But this is going to be very significant because it makes it so as long as you don't have hyper cordial relations with your allies, which you can expel diplomats in order to break or break trade agreements or this type of stuff, you will be able to invalidate war goals pretty aggressively. And I think it'll make the combination of this and the Navy will make things a lot more eco-oriented rather than war-oriented, as well as it's a lot harder to annex subjects now. And so you used to be able to annex subjects a lot more consistently. The fact that it's harder to annex subjects is going to be a bit of an issue as it relates to expansion, because you'll either have to go for the full solo bolo expansion cost, where you will just conquer stuff outright, and it'll take forever to subjugate. Like, I think we were even 1.3, you could subjugate and then annex in 5 years. Obviously, you can't do that now. It takes 15 years because you have to subjugate, reduce autonomy, and then annex. Also doesn't cause as much infamy, but it will change the expansion patterns out a little bit. The peasant changes also change the expansion patterns, because expanding into China, if China remains unpicked, just for the purposes of GDP, is worth a lot less because all these guys are peasants, and so the peasants, it'll be a lot less valuable in terms of GDP. And also, seizing places that have all the financial districts will be extremely valuable for the purposes of increasing your income more than GDP suggests. So seizing the home counties, that's going to be really useful because of how much stuff that they own all over the place. And so this is also going to be maybe a bit of an interesting one. Another thing is power blocks are difficult to evaluate how important they are, or how important mandate is, but in particular, there's a power block that looks really attractive, which is the military treaty, which we can't enact as the USA, big Sag, but if we switch to someone like France, we can enact the military treaty. And the military treaty, it might just be exactly what France wants. The military treaty's ability to get aggressive coordination, or to some lesser extent offensive coordination is really the one we want to talk about. The extra 30% war goal maneuver is going to be very significant in terms of making your wars much more definitive if you win them. Let's call it definitive. And so this will be a bit interesting. The war exhaustion, I don't think that this other stuff is important. To some extent, you could use defensive cooperation if you can pull everyone to your block, and maybe there's something reasonable here, but the military treaty is going to be a lot more attractive. It's also going to be more attractive for this training rate, especially if you are on conscription. However, you can't form this bloc when you're on conscription, but maybe, you could do something like the USA joins in to France's military treaty bloc and then gets the benefit of this training rate, which will allow your conscripts to come up faster. So this is something that I think will be a lot more common, and also which principles are going to be good is also going to be wildly different in this. I know we recently made a video talking about which principles are best. The ones that are going to look really good or considerably better in multiplayer are going to be construction's still going to be good. Advanced research is going to be way better. It's probably just super S tier. Aggressive coordination is going to be much better. Food standardization is probably a little on the slow side, but I'm not really sure. External trade is going to suck because getting a bunch of extra Diplo is not very useful because you can't manipulate the AI, or everyone you can manipulate is much smaller in power. Colonial office is also going to be a lot weaker, but maybe it's still kind of okay because you want to stay under 100 infamy, so this is going to be a bit of a vibe. We might see multiple people using freedom of movement in order to best... that's not allowed. Well, we can't even form the block, but freedom of movement, if one person goes freedom of movement, even if it's not the USA, suddenly they're winning the migration game, and maybe this is really strong, but even as the USA, well, actually, they won't win the migration game with just the first level of freedom of movement. Really, you need the second level to start winning, but this extra quota also looks really attractive, and so I do think this changes things up a bit. I also think that this is really huge for Great Britain, and to a large extent the EIC, because the EIC has more of the subjects. Actually, I don't think the EIC has the meaningful subjects to increase mandate. The recognized powers are better for increasing mandate, and so subjugating minor powers is actually really good for increasing mandate, especially in the early game. This is for single player, but to some extent, but your ability to mandate up really, really quickly is going to be significant. Another thing is radicalism is definitely much more of a problem, and revving is completely intolerable. So everyone's got to know how to abdicate. I still think you run high taxes a lot, but this radicals is going to mean that you're going to cause a ton of mass migrations, and so migrations might be really strong, but again, peasants aren't as useful as they were before. Really keen on seeing if the US makes kind of a breakout performance. And then also, there's no more infamy reset. This is pretty substantive because it makes a lot of the openers worse. As the USA, you used to open with subjugate Mexico, infamy reset. You would have an ally declare cut down to size on you, and then they would enforce it before you enforced on Mexico, so you would get it for free for no infamy. This would also let, we saw in the finals of last season, we saw someone play as Japan, and then they had their USA ally annex and then release them and then reset their infamy for the full purpose of getting the USA tech and institutions on Japan. Overall, it wasn't that successful because Russia in that game interfered with Japan's revolution to reset their turmoil so they could construct, but it was a bit of an interesting move that is no longer going to be possible with the infamy reset. It also makes stuff like transfer EIC considerably worse because that would have been something that you would have done before, although release EIC is free. And if it's free, it's for me in regards to how much infamy it costs. And so that is going to be another substantive thing that we see in 1.7. But those were kind of the ones I wanted to talk about in particular. I do think the ownership change is a bit interesting. I think that everyone still wants to go laissez-faire, in particular in the multiplayer, and there's nothing too crazy about what economic system you want to use. But it's possible that you actually want to run specialist countries, and like the EIC, maybe you keep them with industry band, and you tie them together with someone like Russia for playing the industry, something like this. It's an interesting idea. I don't know how good it is. Russia in particular is actually theoretically better, because Russia has their gentry assembly has this, which gives more aristocratic investment pool contribution efficiency than anyone else. So in theory, Russia would be the best to go agrarian, an agrarian pairing. I don't know if you can set this up or make this work or make it overcome MAPI, but in theory, Russia specializing in agriculture would be good. It's just one of the problems here with Russia is they don't have the cash crops. It's just all grain. And cattle for the most part. They have, I think some stuff down here, like a little bit of cotton and tea and this types of stuff, but overall I don't think think they have enough to really make it work. They also, I mean, they have a little bit of silk, but I don't think they have enough of that stuff to make it work. But maybe if they go after, like, Persia, which has a bunch of opium, and then you play this type of way, certainly there's more potential for unified markets than there was before. If you can have one person form a power block that is... like, let's say Russia forms a power block, and you make that power block into a trade one, so we just leave this one, and then we make a trade block instead, then we will have a singular market, and this will look particularly good if you want to have migration that is accepted cultures, like with the Great Qing or something like this. Well, actually, we would go internal trade here. But if, let's say, we had a market and we figured out a way to pull Great Qing into our block, which I don't think we can, but if there was a way to do that, then we could turn on Great Qing's migration, because now you can migrate discriminated if you're inside the same market if you have open borders. And so there might be strategies around this that are really good, and then you let Russia do the agrarian stuff while Qing does the industrial stuff, which feels really backward, but this would also defend Qing from one of the fronts that they potentially is dangerous for them at game start. To be fair, you could run the three: British East India coming to Great Qing and Russia, but then you'd have an absolute monstrous population that's probably overkill. But it's a bit interesting to think about. Then you'd probably want the EIC specializing in agriculture, though. Russia gets the best bonus. Difficult to think through. It's going to be interesting to see what strategies evolve as a result of, like, 1.7 changes. But now this video is starting to get pretty long, so I hope you guys enjoyed this little kind of strategy overview as well as the ranking. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, subscribe. Again, we will be doing it on 9:30 a.m. PST. We will be probably going for... I forget exactly how long we went for before, probably a similar amount of time, probably till about 1:30, which is 1:15, which is just under 4 hours will be the plan. If you want to sign up, go to the Discord and type "I will take the ring to Mordor" in the LFG section, or the multiplayer section, I forget what it's called. Terrible. And then it will be first come, first serve for this week. After that, it will probably be priority to people who haven't played yet, something like this. But yeah, I think we already said some of the YouTube algo stuff. So other than that, have a good one. A happy Monday, because I still think it's Monday by the time I upload this.